are underway to revamp the collapsed cocoa sector. Incentives will be provided to our hard-working farmers to increase cocoa production. We aim to add 200,000 hectares of cocoa to Ghana's output in order to increase income of our farmers.
What happens when a nation decides it will no longer give away the essence of its labor for others to enrich themselves? Ghana has chosen to ask and answer that question. For more than a century, its cocoa has sweetened the world while leaving its farmers in poverty. Now, with one policy, the country has declared that this arrangement can no longer stand. Ghana has banned the export of raw cocoa beans, insisting that value must finally be created where the crop is grown. This is not only an economic adjustment, it is a philosophical stand. It raises questions about fairness, sovereignty, and the meaning of independence in a world still marked by old hierarchies. What is it going to change for Ghana and the whole world? Let's find out. Sometimes history does not announce itself with gunfire or revolution, but with a quiet decision that carries the weight of centuries. Ghana has just made such a decision. With one announcement, it has declared that the era of sending its cocoa beans away raw, only to see them return as expensive chocolate bars, is over. The government has banned the export of raw cocoa beans to Western countries, a policy that alters the very foundation of the global chocolate trade. From this moment forward, cocoa leaving Ghana must be processed, at least in part, within its borders. Multinational corporations that for generations depended on cheap, unprocessed beans will now have to reconsider their habits, invest in Ghanaian factories, buy semi-finished cocoa products, or lose access altogether. The reasoning behind the decision is straightforward, but the implications are profound. Cocoa is the lifeblood of Ghana's economy, a crop that sustains nearly a quarter of its population. Yet, while Ghana produces roughly 800,000 tons a year, it has historically captured only a fraction of the profits. More than 70% of the world's cocoa comes from Africa, but less than 6% of the $130 billion global chocolate revenue ever reaches the continent. The ban, then, is not merely about beans, it is about dignity, sovereignty, and the right to claim the fruits of one's own labor. The announcement comes at the start of the 2025-26 cocoa season. To reassure its farmers, the government has raised the producer price of cocoa to record levels, a signal that those who labor in the fields will not be left behind. Without this assurance, the policy would have risked alienating the very people it seeks to empower. With it, the state is making a statement. Industrial growth will not come at the expense of the farmer. Beyond Ghana's borders, the reaction has been immediate. Markets wavered, cocoa futures rose, and executives in Zurich, Hamburg, and New Jersey began to calculate the cost of this unexpected disruption. For them, Ghana's move is a storm in a system they once thought unshakable. For Ghanaians, it is an attempt to finally step out of that very storm. There is also a wider African current flowing beneath this decision. Burkina Faso has suspended raw cashew exports, Nigeria is tightening its grip on oil refining, and Botswana has long forced the diamond trade to meet it on fairer terms. Ghana's cocoa ban is therefore not an isolated act of defiance, but part of a broader philosophy emerging across the continent. Wealth must no longer slip away in ships loaded with raw goods. Of course, every choice of this magnitude carries risk. Can Ghana's factories truly process the entire harvest? Can roads, power grids, and ports support the weight of a new industrial demand? Will multinational corporations attempt to retaliate through trade barriers or lobbying? These are real uncertainties, and the answers will not come quickly. But beneath the uncertainty lies something larger. Ghana's decision is a reminder that sovereignty is not a theory. It is built in the practical choices of nations, in the refusal to accept roles that keep them dependent. In banning raw cocoa exports, Ghana has taken a step that is at once economic and symbolic. It has been said, in effect, that we will no longer export poverty, while others export wealth. The ban is only a beginning. To grasp why this moment matters so deeply, we must look back at the history that made it necessary, the long trap of cocoa, and how it became both a blessing and a curse for Ghana. Cocoa has never been merely an agricultural product for Ghana. It has been both a foundation of survival and a chain of dependency. It carried the promise of prosperity, but also the weight of exploitation, binding the country to a global system where value always seemed to vanish the moment the beans left its shores. Cocoa arrived in the Gold Coast in the late 19th century, introduced by a farmer named Tete Kwarshi, whose story is now told almost as legend. Within decades, the crop spread across the fertile soils of Ashanti and Brong-Ahafo, quickly becoming the backbone of the colonial economy. By the 1920s, the Gold Coast was the world's leading producer of cocoa, a title Ghana still contests with Côte d'Ivoire today. On the surface, this seemed like success. Here was a crop that generated revenue, supported infrastructure, and placed the young nation on the map of global trade. But beneath the surface was a harsher truth. Cocoa was cultivated, collected, and exported under a model designed by colonial administrators and foreign companies. The beans were shipped raw to Europe, where factories transformed them into finished products. There, in the roasting, grinding, mixing, and branding, the real wealth was created. Europe consumed chocolate, built global companies, and grew rich, while Ghana remained the supplier of unprocessed beans. This was not an accident. Colonial trade systems were carefully engineered to prevent colonies from developing their own industries. If the Gold Coast had been allowed to refine its cocoa, it could have competed with European manufacturers. Instead, the machinery of policy ensured dependence. Exports of raw beans were encouraged, while attempts at local processing were stifled by tariffs, lack of financing, and limited access to technology. Independence in 1957 freed Ghana politically, but economically the pattern endured. The consequences are visible even today. Despite producing more than two-thirds of the world's cocoa, Africa captures only a tiny share of the global chocolate market. For every $100 chocolate bar sold in Europe, only about $6 remains on the continent, mostly in the form of meager farmgate prices. The remaining $94 goes elsewhere, to the corporations that market, brand, and distribute. What should have been a ladder to prosperity instead became a trap of dependency. It is this history that explains why Ghana's ban is more than just a policy decision. It is a refusal to continue a story written by others. By halting the export of raw beans, Ghana is forcing a confrontation with a system that has long benefited from its compliance. It is saying, the time has come for the transformation of cocoa to take place where it is grown, not only where it is consumed. The significance deepens when one considers the cultural dimension. Cocoa is not just an economic crop. It has shaped Ghanaian identity for more than a century. Entire towns exist because of cocoa. Generations of families have lived, studied, and married thanks to the modest income from its cultivation. To declare that cocoa will now be processed at home is not only an economic move, but a reassertion of cultural pride, a way of saying that Ghana is more than a plantation for the world's sweet tooth. Critics might ask why such a ban was not attempted earlier. The answer lies in the vulnerabilities of small economies within global markets. For decades, Ghana depended on the steady inflow of foreign currency from cocoa exports. Any disruption seemed too risky, but the costs of compliance were high. Infrastructure stagnated, farmers remained poor, and the country cycled through debt crises as it relied on loans from institutions like the IMF and World Bank. The ban today is a sign that Ghana no longer wishes to play the role of debtor and supplicant, but rather of producer and negotiator. And so, the ban matters not only because it disrupts the flow of beans, but because it signals a new philosophy. It is a quiet declaration that history need not repeat itself forever. By keeping the cocoa at home, Ghana is, in a sense, keeping its future at home. Yet history also warns us that breaking old patterns is never easy. The colonial system may be gone, but its shadows remain in the form of global corporations, trade rules, and financial pressures. To see whether Ghana can truly escape the trap, we must look at the practical realities it faces: factories, farmers, and the fragile balance between ambition and capacity. Let's pause for a second to say, big thank you to the Black Culture Diary community, where Black voices, stories, and legacies are preserved and amplified. By becoming a member, you're not just supporting the channel, you're becoming part of a powerful cultural movement. Let's continue. Every bold step in history carries not only the promise of transformation, but also the burden of uncertainty. Ghana's ban on raw cocoa exports is no different. To keep the beans at home is one thing. To build the capacity to process them and ensure the entire chain remains fair is another. Ambition must now meet infrastructure, and ideals must be tested against the realities of farmers' lives and the demands of global markets. The first challenge lies in processing capacity. Ghana produces between 750,000 and 850,000 tons of cocoa annually. Turning this vast harvest into butter, powder, liquor, and chocolate requires a network of factories operating at international standards. At present, Ghana has processing plants, both state-owned and private, but their combined capacity does not yet absorb the entire crop. To close this gap, massive investments will be required in machinery, energy, logistics, and skilled labor. Without sufficient facilities, there is the risk of a surplus of beans rotting in warehouses, leaving farmers unpaid and the policy vulnerable to collapse. This brings us to the second challenge, the farmers themselves. Cocoa farming in Ghana is dominated by smallholders, many of whom cultivate just 2 or 3 hectares of land. These farmers have long endured low prices, fluctuating demand, and poor infrastructure. Their patience for promises of reform is thin, and rightly so. If the ban does not translate quickly into stable incomes and timely payments, farmers may be tempted to bypass official channels, selling their beans through smuggling routes into neighboring countries. Already, reports from past years have shown how porous borders make it easy for beans to leak into Côte d'Ivoire when Ghanaian prices lag. Ensuring farmer loyalty will therefore require not only higher prices, which the government has promised, but also reliable systems of payment and support. The government has sought to preempt this problem by announcing a record producer price for the 2025-26 season. This is more than an economic adjustment. It is a political signal that farmers will not be sacrificed for industrialization. Still, money alone cannot solve the problem. Farmers also need extension services, better access to credit, and long-term programs that encourage younger generations to remain in cocoa farming. Without these, the backbone of the industry may weaken just when it is most needed. A third challenge is infrastructure. Processing cocoa is energy-intensive. Factories require stable electricity, efficient transport networks, and modern storage facilities. Ghana's power grid has improved in recent years, but outages remain a concern, and transport costs from rural farms to processing hubs can be high. If these bottlenecks are not addressed, the efficiency of the new model may be undermined. There is also the question of international pushback. Western chocolate companies, accustomed to cheap Ghanaian beans, may not accept the ban passively. They could respond with trade restrictions, attempts to manipulate cocoa futures prices, or lobbying through international organizations to pressure Ghana into reversing course. History offers many examples of powerful industries resisting changes that threaten their profits. Ghana must therefore be prepared not only to build factories, but also to defend its policy in the court of global trade politics. Yet one should not see these challenges only as obstacles. They are also opportunities for transformation. By building new factories, Ghana creates jobs. Investing in farmers strengthens rural communities. By upgrading infrastructure, it improves not just cocoa but the entire economy. And by standing firm against external pressure, it asserts a sovereignty that has too often been undermined. Still, there is no denying the fragility of this path. A single failed harvest due to climate change, a sudden drop in global demand, or a mismanaged factory investment could unravel progress. Success will require not only vision but discipline, patience, and resilience. It will also require cooperation between government and farmers, between local investors and foreign partners willing to adapt to Ghana's terms, and between Ghana and its neighbors, especially Côte d'Ivoire, whose own cocoa policies will influence the regional balance. Thus, the ban is not a destination, but a beginning. Its survival will depend on whether Ghana can translate a bold declaration into a functioning, fair system that lifts farmers out of poverty and builds industries capable of competing on the world stage. And this raises the next question. What happens beyond Ghana's borders? While the decision is local, its consequences ripple outward. The world's chocolate industry cannot remain untouched. To see the full weight of this ban, we must turn to the global picture, to the factories in Europe, the traders in New York, and the chocolate lovers who may soon discover that their sweet indulgence is tied to Africa's quest for sovereignty. Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. When a single nation alters the course of a commodity on which the world depends, the effects are never confined to its borders. Ghana's ban on raw cocoa exports is not a domestic adjustment. It is a tremor that shakes the entire structure of the global chocolate industry. For decades, chocolate companies in Europe and North America have lived in certainty. The beans will come, cheap and abundant, ready to be transformed in their factories. That certainty is now broken. And with it comes a wave of consequences that will stretch from the farms of Ashanti to the confectionery aisles of London and New York. The most immediate impact is on multinational corporations. Giants such as Nestlé, Lindt, Ferrero, and Hershey have built their empires on predictable supply chains. Their profit margins rest on the assumption that the labor of African farmers remains cheap and that raw beans continue to flow unimpeded into their factories. By demanding that cocoa be processed locally, Ghana has disrupted this foundation. Companies now face stark choices. Either invest in Ghanaian facilities, partnering under Ghana's rules, or risk shortages that could undermine their global dominance. This disruption is not only financial, but psychological. For the first time in living memory, the power balance has shifted, and the producers are dictating terms to the processors. For Western corporations accustomed to commanding supply chains, the realization that Africa can close its gates is deeply unsettling. It forces them to see Ghana not as a passive supplier but as an economic actor with agency. Another ripple is felt in global commodity markets. Cocoa futures traded in London and New York are sensitive to any disruption in supply. Following the announcement, prices rose as traders speculated on the reduced availability of raw beans. In the short term, this may benefit Ghana as higher prices strengthen its bargaining position. But volatility also carries risks. Consumers may face rising chocolate prices, and speculators may seek to exploit instability. In the long run, if Ghana and Côte d'Ivoire both insist on local processing, the very nature of cocoa futures may need to be redefined as the underlying commodity shifts from raw beans to processed products. Consumers themselves will not remain untouched. Chocolate is one of the world's most beloved luxuries, woven into holidays, celebrations, and daily indulgences. If supply chains are disrupted and production costs rise, the price of chocolate on supermarket shelves is likely to increase. This may seem a minor inconvenience to consumers in Paris or Chicago, but it will serve as a reminder that the sweetness they take for granted has always rested on the bitterness of inequality. Ghana's policy forces the world to confront the true cost of chocolate, not just in money, but in justice. The ripple extends further into the geopolitical arena. Other African nations are watching closely. Côte d'Ivoire, the world's largest cocoa producer, has long shared Ghana's frustrations. If it follows Ghana's example, the two nations together would control over 60% the global supply, enough to completely reshape the industry. This possibility alone strikes fear into multinational corporations and the governments that back them. A united African front on cocoa would mirror the power of OPEC in oil, turning West Africa into the decisive voice in the chocolate trade. Nor is cocoa unique. The precedent Ghana sets may inspire similar actions across the continent. Nigeria tightening control over crude oil refining, Burkina Faso over cashews, Zambia over copper, or the Democratic Republic of Congo over cobalt. If Africa insists on processing and refining its own resources before export, the global economic map will be redrawn. Ghana's ban is therefore not only about chocolate, but about a broader shift in how the world relates to African wealth. Of course, global powers may not sit idly by. Trade restrictions, diplomatic pressure, or even new aid conditions could be deployed to push Ghana back into line. Yet such tactics also carry risks. They may only deepen Africa's resolve to seek alliances elsewhere, whether with China, Russia, or emerging economies that show more willingness to invest in local processing. Thus, what begins as a trade policy may evolve into a reshaping of global partnerships. The truth is that the world has always wanted Africa's resources, but not Africa's industries. Ghana has now said that one cannot be had without the other. This forces a reckoning. The chocolate industry must either adjust its foundations or risk disruption at every level. But the ripple effect is not only about economics or geopolitics. It also carries a philosophical weight. For centuries, Africa was told it could not change its role in the global order, that its destiny was to provide raw materials, while others consumed the finished goods. By banning raw cocoa exports, Ghana has given an answer that resonates far beyond cocoa. Africa will no longer accept its place as the world's supplier of unprocessed poverty. And so the global ripple points us toward the deeper question: what does this moment mean for Africa itself? Can the ban on cocoa become the symbol of a larger transformation, one in which sovereignty is not only political but economic? To answer that, we must turn from the reactions of others to the meaning of this step for Africa's own future. Ghana's decision to ban the export of raw cocoa is not only about beans or chocolate. It is about the meaning of sovereignty in a world where power often disguises itself as trade. Political independence came to Ghana in 1957, but economic independence has remained elusive, held back by structures designed to keep Africa as a source of raw materials. Now, with this single act, Ghana is asserting that sovereignty cannot be complete unless it extends to the economy. For decades, African nations have walked a path shaped by external institutions. The International Monetary Fund and the World Bank prescribed policies that encouraged raw exports, promising growth through integration into global markets. Aid packages were tied to structural adjustments that often dismantled local industries. The result was dependency. Africa exported cocoa, copper, oil, and diamonds, only to import finished goods at many times the price. This cycle was not simply inefficient, it was a continuation of colonial logic under a different name. Ghana's ban challenges that logic. By demanding that value be added within its borders, the country is attempting to break free from a system that drains wealth outward. In doing so, it has joined a broader African current that is quietly gathering momentum. Burkina Faso's suspension of raw cashew exports, Nigeria's tightening of oil refining rules, and Botswana's insistence on handling more of its diamonds domestically are all parts of the same story. The insistence that sovereignty is hollow without control over resources. The philosophical weight of this shift cannot be ignored. For centuries, Africa was told it was too weak, too divided, too underdeveloped to manage its own industries. That myth has served as a justification for keeping the continent in a subordinate role. But when a nation like Ghana says no more raw cocoa, it is not just altering trade flows. It is rewriting the story Africa tells about itself. It is saying that the continent is not condemned to eternal dependency, but capable of claiming its place as a producer of wealth rather than merely its supplier. Of course, this path will not be free of obstacles. External pressure may mount, and internal weaknesses may be exposed. Factories must be built, workers trained, electricity stabilized, and farmers protected from exploitation. The road is long and the risks are real. Yet sovereignty is never achieved in comfort. It is always wrested from uncertainty and often at great cost. What matters is the direction. Africa is no longer moving in circles but toward a horizon it has chosen for itself. There is also the possibility of regional solidarity. If Ghana's example inspires Côte d'Ivoire to act, the two nations together could form a cocoa alliance powerful enough to reshape global markets. If other African countries follow in their respective sectors, refining cobalt in Congo, smelting bauxite in Guinea, processing lithium in Zimbabwe, then the pattern of history begins to change. What was once a continent of extraction could become a continent of production. This possibility extends into geopolitics. As Africa asserts control over its resources, it also gains leverage in its relationships with the rest of the world. Partners who once saw the continent as a place to source raw goods cheaply will now have to meet it on new terms. This may drive Africa toward alliances with emerging powers willing to invest in local processing, whether through BRICS+ or bilateral partnerships. It may also force the West to reconsider its approach, shifting from paternalistic aid to genuine industrial cooperation. The cocoa ban, then, is not just an economic decision, but a symbolic act of defiance against a long history of being told what Africa cannot do. It is a declaration that sovereignty is not a flag or a national anthem, but the ability to decide what leaves one's shores and in what form. Ghana has chosen to export wealth, not poverty. That choice, if sustained, will ripple across generations. And so, what began as a headline about cocoa becomes something larger, a question about the future of Africa itself. Will this be remembered as the moment when one country's decision inspired a continent to reclaim its economic destiny? Or will it be recorded as a noble experiment undone by pressure and circumstance? The answer lies not only in the hands of governments, but in the resolve of farmers, workers, and citizens who see their future in this bold step. For now, the world waits, but history has a way of favoring those who dare to change its course. Ghana has dared, and Africa, watching closely, may yet follow. Will this be remembered as the moment Africa began to reclaim the wealth of its own soil? Let us know in the comment section. Can one bold decision in Ghana spark a continental shift in how resources are valued? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.